All right. This is also a pretty short one, so we'll do this one as well.
In your story, it's important to balance them out. Otherwise, your story will read like a mishmash of elements that don't go together, which is exactly why I wanted to discuss how to balance two genres in your story. Let's get started.
Balancing two genres.
Hey guys, Nour here and welcome back to my channel. For those visiting for the first time, hello, I'm the fantasy author of the novel Divinity Falling. Be sure to subscribe for weekly writing advice videos. So I don't know about you, but I think writing a story with multiple genres is really fun. In fact, almost everything I write falls under two genres. For example, Divinity Falling is an urban fantasy, but it could also fall within the romance genre. And because I'm constantly writing stories with two genres, I know a thing or two about balancing them. Now, it is important to remember that every story is different. Two friends might write a horror comedy and end up with a completely different theme, voice, and tone. One friend might decide to make their story full of dark humor, while the other might concentrate more on the horror and use comedy as comic relief. My point is, know the story you want to tell because at the end of the day, only you know what works for you. Stick to your vision and instincts and the process will be easier. So with that said, my first tip for balancing two genres in your story is to have a clear understanding of the genres you want to write. For example, you can't write a romantic murder mystery if you don't understand the elements involved in those separate genres. So read other books in those genres and have a general idea of what those plots look like. Once you've done that, it's time to bring your two genres together. To do this effortlessly, the trick is to blend elements from the two genres that work well together. I'm going to start with an easy example. Let's say you're writing an action-adventure novel, which is a combination of action and adventure. Who knew? We're all familiar with these genres, so much so that we know that they go great together. So when you're planning an action-adventure story, you don't think of the action scenes as separate from the adventure scenes. That's because you think of them in a unified way. Your character is going on an adventure, and during this adventure, they will discover things that lead them to action-heavy scenes, like car chases. And that's exactly how you should think of any two genres you want to combine. So let's say you're writing a fantasy romance. You want the romance to play a role in the fantasy side of the story. Maybe your main character is learning about their magic powers while keeping those powers secret from their love interest. This ties the fantasy aspect with the romance and increases tension. Or maybe the main character's love interest introduces them to the fantasy world. Basically, let your character's love life collide with the fantastical elements. The two genre elements are happening side by side, but they definitely affect each other. Here's another example. Let's say you're writing a sci-fi horror novel. So don't write a horror novel that happens to have a lot of technology, because that wouldn't be a good balance. The two genres elements wouldn't be affecting each other here. Instead, write a story where the horror is tied to the sci-fi elements. For instance, your characters are running away from AI robots who aim to kill them and take over their city. And just like that, you've created balance. You combine the elements in a unified way. So to summarize, in order to balance two genres in your story, know the elements of those genres, know the kind of story you want to write, and blend elements from the two genres that work well together. And if you're not sure if you're blending the elements well, simply ask yourself, do the elements of one genre affect the elements of the other genre? And if they're not affecting each other, then you did not blend them well. For example, if your AI robots are actually nice, but there's a serial killer on the loose, and the two storylines never connect, then you didn't blend those genres well. So that's all I have for you today. I'd love to know, does your current work in progress fall under multiple genres? Let me know in the comments. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe. I put out weekly writing advice videos that will take your story to the next level. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm up to from day to day and to chat with me. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Frayne, Alan J. Early, and Noah Kovanti from my shout out tier over on Patreon, as well as all my amazing patrons. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate you. And remember, Nour for president.
So that was a quick video. As far as like the idea of combining genres, how do I put this? Like, I just feel like there wasn't a whole lot to like really be learned in what she said there. It didn't really go deep enough. It was very surface level, right? Just combine the genres, know what the genres are, and then put them together. Her main takeaway was make it to where they affect each other, right? So in the horror sci-fi example, the horror aspect is that a sci-fi entity, being like, robots with AI, are attacking people, and that's horrific, right? So you have this back and forth, this crossover, right? It's science is scary, right? That's kind of like science is the horror, right? And it's like, yeah, okay. It's just one of those things where it's almost kind of like, look, have I ever read like a pure romance that didn't have any other genre in it? Have I ever read a sci-fi that didn't have any other genre in it? Is there a way to make a story that's realistic without blending genres, without having more than one genre in it, right? That it almost seems a little weird. Like the need for this video seems kind of weird, I guess. Like, she's not wrong when she says make them affect each other. That is a good tip. Make them affect each other. But I didn't like what she said when she was like, if you didn't blend it right, then you didn't do a good job on, if they don't affect each other, you didn't do a good job on blending them. But it's like, well, hey, look, I want to have a horror story, but I want to have it set in the distant past. Like, it's set in, 1384, let's say, right? So now I've got this historical horror, okay? And the horror is just, maybe like a serial killer is the main horror. So there's some guy, he's going from village to village, he's taking people out into the woods, he's hanging them up, he's cutting pieces of them off, and it's horrible. The only blend that's really happening here is that it's just happening in that past time frame, right? It's just the time that it's in. The same thing could be true if it was a fantasy, right? If it's a fantasy, a lot of fantasies are in the kind of like the Dark Ages, medieval times, right? So you just have it in a fantasy world where maybe it's a mage doing these things, or maybe it's not even a mage. Maybe it's just a regular guy who's doing these things, right? And you just have this world of magic kind of in the background. So like nothing magical is happening here. The police, whatever, like the town guards or whatever, who's trying to figure out this murder, there's no real magic going on because all the magic's happening in the background, and the killer is also non-magical. It's still fantasy, right? It's still happening in this fantasy world. It just depends on how much you want to blend it. Do you want to make it to where the killer is magical? Do you want to make it to where it's like this mundane killer is killing people in a magical world without using magic? I agree with her that, blending these things is important, but it almost just feels like so natural that you would just do it by mistake, if we said action adventure, those things go so hand in hand that it's almost like you can't do them without each other to a certain degree, like you can't have an adventure without having some sort of action in it, right? What adventure is really an adventure if there's no action, right? Some sort of chase, some sort of fight, right? Whatever it might be. So again, it feels weird to say like balance the genres. I mean, maybe that's why it's so short of a video, right? There's not a whole lot you can say about it, since they just kind of fall together, I guess. All right, she had another one here, so we'll listen to this one too. This one's another 4 minutes, so we'll go ahead and do this. And I'm going to remember this time. Turn it down.
I'm sharing my #1 tip for writing a gripping first line, so be sure to stick around. Let's get started.
All right, gripping first line. That is one of the the hardest things to do. So let's see what she has to say about that.
Hey guys, Nour here, and welcome back to my channel. For those visiting for the first time, hello! I'm the fantasy author of the novel Divinity Falling. Be sure to subscribe for weekly writing advice videos. So let's talk about first lines. We're all aware that the very first line of a story needs to hook readers. It needs to intrigue them enough to want to keep on reading. So in essence, all you have to do is create intrigue with your first line. I know this sounds vague. It's like saying in order to hook readers, you need to hook them. Like, yeah, obviously, but how do you do that? How do you actually create intrigue? The answer is a lot less complicated than you think. You write something that gets readers asking questions. That's my number one tip for writing a gripping first line. Now, implementing that tip can be a challenge, but once you start thinking of first lines as statements that get readers asking questions, it gets easier. Let's take a look at some examples of gripping first lines. Every summer, Ling Kong returned to Goose Village to divorce his wife, Shuyu. This statement has so many layers to it. It makes me ask, why does Ling Kong keep divorcing his wife? Wasn't the first time final? What's going on here? And just like that, I want to know more. I want answers. Another famous first line is from George Orwell's 1984. It was a bright cold day in April, and the clocks were ticking 13. The first part of the sentence is so ordinary. It was just a cold day in April. So what? But then Orwell surprises us. The clock strikes 13. This isn't ordinary. What's going on? What were...
Well, it's also not super natural that it's cold in April. April is usually in spring, so it should be kind of warm, but...
world are we in? Something else to notice about these first lines is that they're simple. They're not confusing with a billion ideas. They have one message. They convey their idea without leaving readers trying to decipher their meaning. So there's a clear difference between getting readers to ask questions because they're curious and getting readers to say, I don't understand, can someone translate? You don't want to clutter the first sentence with 10 different messages. Keep them simple but intriguing. Here are a few other examples of gripping first lines. It was a pleasure to burn. Again, why would the narrator say this? We're curious and we want to know. Is the narrator saying that they love to get burned? Or are they saying that they love burning other things? We don't know, but we would like to know. In this first line, we don't even know who the narrator is, but the statement makes us invested. And here's another favorite. All children, except one, grow up. This one comes from Peter Pan. It's simple, it's direct, and it's engaging. Why is there only one child who doesn't grow up? You can't help but want to know the answer, which gets you reading. Also, keep in mind that these lines don't start with dialogue or a cliche. They don't start with a character waking up or a character narrating a dream. Why? Because that's not really impactful, and there's a reason it's cliche. Also, cliche opening lines don't get readers to ask questions. Sure, your first line is your character waking up. So what? They might as well go back to sleep because we're bored. The same idea applies to dialogue. Even though starting with dialogue can cause some intrigue, it could also confuse readers. They'll read the dialogue out of context, so it doesn't feel as effective. There are some exceptions to this rule, but generally, a gripping first line doesn't start with dialogue. But they always start with a statement that triggers questions. Before we wrap things up, I want to read one more first line. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Pivot Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. I mean, how can you not love this line? It makes you wonder, what makes the Dursleys normal? What do they consider not normal? Why are they glad by this information? It's a simple statement, but it gets you asking questions. And that's really the biggest thing to keep in mind when coming up with your first line. Just don't try too hard to shock readers. Keep it simple but intriguing. So
the one thing I would say about that first line from Harry Potter is that it does kind of throw you off because of the fact that you got this book. It's about a boy. His name is Harry Potter. But the first line is about Mr. and Mrs. Dursley. I want to read about Harry Potter. Why am I reading about Mr. and Mrs. Dursley right now? Who are these and why do I care, right? So I actually think that opening line, while it does raise a question, it raises other questions that it doesn't want to raise, like where's Harry? How far do I need to skip in the book to get to Harry? Because that's where I want to be reading, right? I would never tell anyone to start a story like chapter 1. Prologues are different because of the fact that you can. Prologues are basically just different. The fact that it's like separate from the story. Prologues and epilogues are not technically part of the main story. They relate to it in some way, whether it be the theme or whether it be like some piece of information that, you know, knowing can maybe skew things a little differently in the story. But in my opinion, prologues and epilogues are completely optional. They do not need to be read. But if you do read them, you've gained something somehow. Like you've gained a little extra than not reading them. But if they were required, they would be a chapter in the book rather than a prologue or epilogue. So starting your book off with a character who is not your main character, I think is a very bad idea. Chapter 1 should start with your character. Here is probably the best opening line that I've ever read. It is by Stephen King, so it's, you know, he knows what he's doing. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. It's very short, but it gives you two characters, the gunslinger and the man in black. The man in black is doing something. The gunslinger is doing something. We have a location. This is character, scene, middle of the action. They are doing this right now. Tension, because this guy is following the man in black who's fleeing, right? And then this is the plot as well. Those 5 things, I always tell people when I'm critiquing their work, you want to have at least 3 of them in your opening line. You also want to make your line as small as possible. You do want to have a short line. I kind of think of like E equals MC squared. It's very, very condensed, but that actually tells you a lot. It's actually it says a lot inside of that little space. This right here also says a lot inside of its little space. So I always say you want to get 3 of these in. The tension and the middle of the action and the character are the 3 that I would try to nail down. Setting, I think you don't have to have it in your first sentence. You could have that in your second or third sentence. And then plot is one of those things where it's not exactly felt in the moment, because you don't know if this is really the plot or not, right? The plot, right, might be that the gunslinger catches people, right? You don't really know that he's actually after this man in black, like, and that's the plot of the story. He might just be catching people. The man in black might just be one in a long list, right? You don't know, okay? But this happens to actually be the plot of the story, okay? Is that he's after this dude. So the plot is something that I also think that if you're going to cut one of them, it should either be the plot or the scene. But if you can get all 5 of those things in there, like this, whew, boy, that's a lot, and it's really good. And it does, like she was saying before, you want to have the reader asking questions. Who's the man in black? Who's the gunslinger? Why is he after the man in black? You know, he's fleeing. What did he do that makes this gunslinger guy follow him, right? Why are they in a desert? Why are they in a desert is, again, a lesser question, right? The meaty questions are the ones about the tension, the action that we're actually in, you know, and who they are. Those are the meaty questions, which is why I say middle of the action, tension, and character are the 3 that you really want to have in your first line. So there was a couple lines that she said that yes, they do raise questions. They do raise some questions there, but are they really good questions? You know, are they good enough to really get me to buy this book? Because usually when I go buy a book, you know, if I'm in a store, if I'm online, I'm going to read that first page. And every time that I basically read, every time that I'm looking for a book, is the cover gripping? Is the back blurb gripping? Is the first line gripping? And then is the first page gripping? All four of those have hard stops after them. If the answer is no to any one of those, I just stop, because I can find a book that says that the answer is yes to all four of those questions. So I'm gonna do that, right? I'm gonna spend my time on books that say that all four of these are yeses. And if I get to your first line and it's just, it's not good enough, basically, then I'm going to assume that the rest of your writing, because your first line is the line that you've spent the most time on. It's the most important line. All authors know this. There's not an author out there that doesn't understand that the most important line is your first. So this should be the line that you've spent the most time on. If that line isn't gripping, I have no reason to believe that the rest of your book is going to be gripping when your first line wasn't. Sorry.
Well, that's all I have for you today. I'd love to know, do you have a favorite first line? Let me know in the comments. If you're new to my channel, be sure to subscribe. I put out weekly writing advice videos that will take your story to the next level. Also, don't forget to follow me on social media to see what I'm up to from day to day and to chat with me. And before we go, I just want to give a quick shout out to Sarah Frayne, Alan J. Early, and Noah Kovanti from my shout out tier over on Patreon, as well as all my amazing patrons. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate you. And remember, Nour for president.
Alright, very nice. Again, I don't really disagree with her. It's just I feel like that wasn't deep enough. I don't think she went really deep enough. Alright, so that one's 28, so we'll do that one tomorrow. Thanks for stopping by, guys, and we'll see you next time. Happy writing, happy reading.